Welcome to Parenting GPS, navigating your parenting journey. I'm Kari Kling, the host of your show. When I began my teaching career in 1981, it was very, very rare to have a child in my class who had any kind of a diagnosis or was on any kind of medication. I don't think too many teachers in classrooms can say that today. One of the things that we know is that chronic illness and autism in children has been soaring. In fact, since 2000, autism rates are up 241%. Some people say there's perhaps better diagnosis, but I don't think that's the whole story, and neither does my guest. Today, we're going to share with you why our guest thinks that rates of chronic illness and autism in children have soared, and most importantly, what can parents do about it even before there is a problem? I'd like to take a moment and introduce today's incredible guest to you, Dr. Amy Dersken. Amy Dersken, ND, specializes in working with both autism and chronically ill patients, including Lyme disease, PANS, and PANDAS. And by the way, if any of you are interested what that is, we did a show on that. It was our second episode. Please take a look at it. She holds a BS in biochemistry and a doctorate in naturopathic medicine, who works integratively using prescription and natural treatments. Dr. Dersken is one of the first naturopathic physicians to become a fellow with the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, working to broaden her skills for working with autism. She is board certified in integrative medicine, in integrative pediatrics, and is also a member of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine to further her knowledge on addressing inflammation and immune dysfunction. Dr. Dersken's typical patients tend to be those who have already seen several doctors and specialists and have relatively normal labs that don't match the symptoms they are experiencing. Dr. Dersken is a frequent keynote speaker at a variety of autism and Lyme-focused conferences. Welcome, Dr. Amy Dersken. It's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kari. It's great to be here.
So what do you see in your practice? How long have you been practicing? And do you see the kinds of increases in numbers that I just mentioned? You know, the other number, let me just mention this before you begin. Not only has autism, a diagnosis of autism increased 241% since the year 2000, but chronic illness in children has increased 30 to 40%. What do you think is going on?
Yeah, so a couple questions there. So bigger thing is I've been working in this type of illness now for 20 years, which is dating me right now. And it's kind of crazy to think, but it's interesting. You know, I started in 2003 seeing my first autistic child. And at that point, it was relatively rare to come across, and it was pretty darn easy to treat. You know, there were just a few things that we needed to do. And as time's gone on, you know, I have specialized in this, but the cases coming to me are more difficult and more difficult. The rates are definitely increasing. And I'm seeing more of a pattern of a transition where it's becoming more PANS and PANDAS-like. So we're seeing more of this allergy, autoimmune type response versus just a straight nutritional deficiency. And I'm seeing that across the board also in my adult patients as well. It's quite a bit alarming.
And so, you know, one of the things that I know back in the day when I began my teaching career in 1981, people, you know, doctors used to say to parents, you know, if your child has an autism diagnosis, that there was really nothing you can do. But that isn't true at all, is it?
It's not true at all. I think regardless of your diagnosis, autism, any other diagnosis, there's so many things that you can do to reduce the severity of symptoms.
So obviously, the earlier treatment, the better. What kinds of things would you even encourage parents to look for to know that maybe there's a problem? And then we'll get into in the second segment about, you know, what could be causing those things. But what are maybe some behaviors that you encourage parents to kind of look for, to think maybe there's some intervention that's needed here?
Well, you'll see differences. You'll see a lack of engagement, a lack of eye contact, You'll see some posturing. I see a lot of kids that, kids don't express pain in the same way that adults do. So they may press themselves against you, bury their head into you. They might posture over the couch if there's a lot of gut issues. You might notice a lot of digestive distress. Big bloated tummy isn't necessarily just a cute thing that we see in those little 2-year-olds. It's usually, some digestive issues that can turn into something else. Definitely watching for funny rashes. I see a lot of reactions, the red ears, the little red flushed cheeks after eating, the dry peeling lips or reactions there. Those are all signs of allergy or immune reactions or some gut reactions. The other thing to really watch for are some of these funny cycles, that on a monthly cycle, your child is either getting sick more often than you think they should. They're the ones in the household who aren't recovering, or they're having these cycles of funny behaviors where they're just acting out and, it's not a parenting thing.
Right. Especially if you have more than one child and you're saying, well, that child isn't doing it and this child is. So maybe, it's not the parenting thing, like you said. And so, Dr. Dersken, what are some things that are different? And we'll continue with this in the next segment, but what are some things that are different now than opposed to maybe even 50 years ago, 40 years ago, that you think is part of the causation of this dramatic increase of chronic illness and autism in our children?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many theories out there, and I think it's a culmination of a lot of things, and even just the transition that I've seen in the last 20 years. Our food quality sources have gone down, and especially if we're looking the last 40, 50 years, the minerals in the soil are depleted. We do have more GMOs. We have more antibiotics introduced into our food sources. We're seeing more pesticides, and this isn't me taking a political stand. It's just looking at lab results that we're seeing these high levels of glyphosate and other pesticides showing up in the urine, that even in kids who are choosing to go organic, it's just in our environment. We have more vaccine schedules, regardless of your beliefs on that, there are more things we're being introduced to. There's a wider variety of viruses now we're being introduced to. There's less movement. I mean, I think the thing that we've all noticed probably in the last 5 years that's really exaggerated is, there's so much online teaching now. They're not teaching cursive writing anymore. They're teaching keyboarding in grade school. I've seen in my own child, 10, 12 hours a day on the computer. And that was something that we had the luxury 20 years ago when treating autism. We could limit screen time, just for playtime. And now it's this huge bombardment. And then there's all the EMFs and the 5G, and there's just all this stimulus happening for these poor developing brains.
Exactly. And it's so complicated. There's not one easy answer. But what we're going to do is take a break. And when we come back, we're going to share with our viewers about what are some things that could be going on, and then get to what can you do about it right away. We'll be right back. So, Dr. Amy, as you look at the children that you treat, how do you see autism, a diagnosis of autism, to be different from a diagnosis of chronic illness?
Yeah, this is a great question. And a lot of people have asked, how do I treat autism? And I'm also working with adults with chronic illness and Lyme disease, but they're so similar. Autism is a spectrum. That's why they call it a spectrum disorder. And that starts with allergies and then goes into ADD, ADHD, then goes into Asperger's, and then goes into autism. So it's a gradation of that spectrum. And so it's an inflammatory process, right? Or it's an immune process that seems to be happening. And then it's throwing off our neurotransmitters. It's just the extent of the behaviors that are happening. So it's really not that different. It's just a more extreme presentation. And often when we get into, stronger levels of autism, more symptomatic children, there's probably some genetic issues, methylation issues, glutathione pathway concerns that are a little more extreme than the other child. But the way we approach it is so similar.
And, I'm so happy that you said that, because even before I knew as much as I know now about it, even when I first began teaching, even before I began teaching, I always knew, and I always used to share with parents, look for the root cause. So if your child isn't, attending properly, if your child isn't acting or, behaving in a way that seems to be appropriate, or learning in a way that seems to be appropriate, before we run and say, okay, what medication can I give my child to help with focus or something like that, that many times if we look for the root cause and we take care of that, the problem takes care of itself. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. Whether it's your child is presenting as autistic, not making eye contact, or
Mhm.
you yourself are dealing with some things, you're having chronic headaches, you're having pain, you're having all kinds of symptoms. This is your body giving you that warning sign of like, hey, something's wrong,
Mhm.
right? So we can jump to a medication to put out that fire or like suppress that warning sign, but the problem is still going on.
It's a
So I
Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid.
absolutely. So,
Yeah.
I don't disagree with doing some of those treatments, right? To help you with your sanity or to help you with your symptoms, but you do have to look at the root cause if you really want the problem to end.
Right. Even with very young children, even with, babies that are less than a year old, you can,
Especially with young children. They're so vulnerable. Their little brains and their immune systems are just developing.
right. And I see so many parents that they say, well, my doctor said, just wait, it's developmental, just wait. And, my thought is don't wait. If you feel that there's something going on, pursue it.
Yeah, we call it the mama meter and trust it. It's usually right. Right. So
Exactly.
why wait? You don't need to put a label on it. It doesn't matter. That was probably the biggest gift I got when I did my residency with Dr. Klinghardt is it doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. It doesn't matter if you are wheeled in a wheelchair or you're coming in and you don't talk or you just have a little bit of a headache. We need to look at some of these warning signs and start at the foundation and work from there.
So where should parents begin, Dr. Dirksen, in terms of what kinds of things to look for in terms of, okay, so maybe their blood tests are pretty normal looking, but they still have all of these symptoms. What are some things that could be going on that maybe won't be picked up on a regular blood test?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that could be going on. And I spoke a little bit of this on our earlier segment about just, some of the look at your child physically, look at their skin. Do they have eczema? The skin is a reflection of things in the gut. And most of the theories coming out now that we've been, hypothesizing and now it's actually proven is most of the neurological symptoms are coming from the gut. So that's a huge warning sign. Do your child's stools like vary or are they horribly stinky? That's not normal. Do they float and they're oily? They're probably not digesting fats very well. And then there's a lot of these infections. Maybe your child has had a lot of ear infections, but what happens with their behaviors when they're sick? Are they better when they get a fever? We see that sometimes. I know that you and I have spoken about that at times. Or do they get triggered? Because sometimes kids don't necessarily get sick. And, in your show talking about pans and pandas, we'll see that, you don't get a normal sore throat or those things, but you get these really odd behaviors that happen.
Mhm. Mhm. In fact, speaking of that, a mom that I know told me, and this is before she even knew what pans and pandas. And for those of you that haven't seen the show, it's basically a dysregulated immune response, most of the time to strep. And it's not, as Dr. Dirksen said, it's not the normal. You have a sore throat, feel achy, you have a fever, that kind of thing. And she said to me, she said, when my daughter was little, and the daughter's like 40 now, so people didn't even know about that then. She said, I always knew when she had strep because she got this funny look in her eye and she just acted differently. So
Yeah.
yes, you're absolutely right. What about things like parasites and other things that maybe we don't think of as a first thought that something is wrong?
Yeah, so there's a lot of clues that you can see in your child before you ever do any lab tests. So Clostridia species are probably one of the most common. So we tend to see kids that are like biting the edges of their shirt or always chewing on things or acting out and being very aggressive all of a sudden. So I tend to see that with Clostridia. With parasites, we see a lot of histamine reactions. So I'll tend to see the rash on the chest or around the mouth. And we'll definitely see these cyclical behaviors around the full or the new moon. That they just get really agitated and wound up in like this hyper excitatory sort of state.
Mhm.
Strep presents as a lot of tics. There's a lot of other symptoms that can come with strep, but it's not always the sore throat. It's usually kind of wild, erratic behavior, or I've actually seen really dark depression. And some kids even get suicidal, which is terrifying for a parent and for, a physician trying to treat them. But I see these bugs can do some of those things too.
Right.
Um,
And I think the thing that I want to point out also that you're saying this is if a child is sick of chronic illness, and also with autism, and we already think of it with autism, but it's not necessarily just the physiological reaction. I don't have energy, I don't feel well, I have a sore throat, my tummy hurts, but there are changes mentally and emotionally as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. They think up to 80% of our neurotransmitters, so things like serotonin and dopamine, come from our gut.
Right. And we're going to
So
talk about that in the next segment about diet and what parents can do. Um,
yeah, and there's so much that you can do, and it doesn't matter about, I mean, the lab test can be helpful down the road, but if you see some of these behaviors, we start to work on cleaning that up, and a lot of times you can calm that down. You don't jump to an ADD med, you don't jump to Ritalin or Adderall. You start with the gut and you clean that up, or you look at, are there some things, that might be triggering my child, and you trust your instincts.
right. And so even with an autism diagnosis, and you're the doctor, I'm not, but we both know of a lot of children who were pretty severe in terms
Yes.
of their diagnosis of autism. Maybe they were nonverbal, they weren't, no eye contact, they couldn't really perform basic tasks. And then you clean up the gut, as you say, you get rid of the infections, reduce the inflammation, and lo and behold, these kids are presenting so much more normally. And so it's not just about the chronic illness; they're all tied together, correct?
Absolutely. They're all tied together.
So,
And our job as a parent is to make our child more comfortable, really, and to help them thrive in the best way they can.
mhm. And if you were speaking to a parent, someone out there listening, or a grandparent, and you heard them say, well, my child's doctor or my doctor said there's nothing we can do, would you encourage them to just ignore that and go find another doctor?
Absolutely. And I've heard that so many times, and I have to bite my tongue and not just get furious, because
Right,
there's always things that you can do. You
right.
may not be able to get your child 100% neurotypical, but there's always things you can do, and there's always things that you can do.
Always. We can always
Always.
make it better. And so
Yes.
when we come back, we're going to talk about what are some things you can begin to do in your home the minute you finish watching this episode. We'll be right back. What I'd like to do right now, Dr. Dirksen, is to be able to give parents or grandparents a tangible to-do list, if you will, of things to think about to help reduce the toxins in their homes, because we know that our environment has more toxins today also, and you briefly talked about that at the beginning, more toxins in our environment than ever before. And so how can parents look at their homes, and even if their children are doing well, even if their children are thriving, sometimes with certain kids it's the accumulation of toxins, it's the accumulation of things that can kind of put them over the edge. And so what are some things that parents can do right now that can help reduce the toxins in their home?
This is a great question. I always think of any sort of illness as a metaphor of the cup is full, right? And so it's once our cup is overflowing is when we're symptomatic. So what can we do to reduce our cup? And those are the things that we can control. We can control our home. So reducing fragrance in the home, any of the artificial fragrance. So no Glade plugins for you. Be careful with candles and any of those. Those are all stimulants and excitatory to the nervous system, and they're toxic for us. They're another thing our body has to clear. The other
Mhm.
thing I would look at is detergents. I want you going fragrance free. I don't want these downy, extra fabric softener things that smell great for a couple months. That's not good for our kids, especially the child with eczema or any skin reactions. But again, these things are excitatory, and it's one more thing our body needs to clear. I'd be careful about cooking in plastic. A lot of people are microwaving food in plastic, Tupperware containers. Use the glass containers, because otherwise the phthalates are bleeding out into the food. A water filter for the bath can be really nice, especially if the water quality in your area is known to not be great, or if there's a strong chemical smell, if there's a lot of chlorine or those things used in the area that you live. Reducing dust and clutter is actually really important, especially in a bedroom. When we go to sleep at night is where we're trying to recover. And so if there's a lot of dust, those dust mites can contain molds and all sorts of other things. And if we have pets, there's a lot of that. Again, it's just more stimulus. So reducing clutter can be good. I'm careful with some kids with a lot of sensory issues. Carpets can be a problem, especially if they've been washed repeatedly and there's been some problems there, and it just really holds on to dust mites. I was at a conference and it talked about, to reduce the dust mites, you have to vacuum 7 passes over any area every single day. I don't know. I'm a mom. There's no way on this earth. I'm lucky to vacuum once a week. So hard surfaces, especially if you're renovating a home or getting a new home, and especially in the bedrooms and the play areas, can be good. You can always get a rug that you can clean. Zero VOC paints are good if you're doing some renovations. And the nice thing is the paint VOC levels are coming down, but do ask for that. It's not that much more expensive at that point. It makes a big difference. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, the big one, and there's no way that we could talk about it today, is mold, right? So is there been water damage in your house? Do you have that musty smell in the bathroom or a leaking toilet that's been there? Mold is the secret bad guy that really contributes to any sort of chronic illness. And if you have young kids, or if you're a mom with some autoimmunity, or there's anything going on, we have to look at that. And it's a huge can of worms, to start digging for that. But you can reduce humidity in the house. So keeping humidity around 50% or lower, especially in those bathrooms, running those air fans, and also getting a good quality air filter with a micro HEPA filter that would actually filter out molds.
And the mold, and obviously depending on where in the world you live, it may be more of a problem than another. But I just want to share this with you and our viewers. I live in Arizona, and a lot of people think, oh, well, the humidity, it's so dry here, we just don't have to worry about mold. But I know that I've worked with lots of families here in the Phoenix area where, there was a water leak inside the wall, a slow leak, and nobody knew about it, and mold was forming. So it's not always something that you can see. It could be behind the wall.
No, I talked to a building biologist, and they actually said areas like Arizona can be the worst because you have the differential of it being cool inside because of the air conditioning and so hot outside.
Yeah.
And with it being dry, a lot of these mold spores are in the air environment. And they were saying that homes that are even over a year old, that almost all of them had high mycotoxin, which are the mold chemical levels.
Oh,
really
so
crazy.
Scary. And as a mom, and yes, you're a doctor and you're also a mom. And for the moms out there, I know that it can feel like, oh, another thing to have to worry about, another thing that I have to, think about. And the purpose of doing this is not to make you feel overwhelmed. It's to say, you know what, I want to have knowledge. Knowledge is power. And if something's going on with our kids, we want to know, obviously, everything that we can possibly know. So those are some things that would be in the home, Dr. Dersken. Let's talk about diet. And I know we could do a whole show on just
we could do many shows on diet. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I'm going to look at a list here a little bit just to narrow it down. So let's start with the simple stuff. Let's reduce sugar as much as we can, and which is tough. Little ones tend to crave sugar, especially if they're yeasty, they're going to want even more. Let's go organic when we can. So especially dairy, because dairy is, fatty and it concentrates that. And when you can also go organic on your meats, I think it's really important. There are food lists for fruits and vegetables called the Dirty Dozen or the Clean 15 that you can look up online. That'll give you an idea of which foods are cleaner that you probably don't have to pay the extra to go organic, and which are the ones that are more problematic. And that changes from season to season. So that's an easy way to keep up and to look at your budget. Kids need fat, so good quality fats. So organic butter, ghee, any of these good oils are so good for their developing brains.
What about processed foods?
Oh yeah. So that's the big one. So it's interesting. So I do muscle testing as part of what I do, and I'll have people come in who have been gluten-free and casein-free. So gluten tends to be a big immune trigger. Casein is commonly what we find in dairy and can be very problematic for kids with a lot of digestive issues, bloating, chronic ear infections, sinus infections, but they'll bring in the foods they're eating. And then often what happens is then we get all these, gluten-free junk food options, right? And they tend to be a little bit cleaner, but now we have all these simple carbohydrates that go straight to sugar. But then the other thing is, kids love their Doritos and their candies with all of these dyes. I mean, Halloween is probably the craziest time in my clinic, because right after Halloween, when all these kids have been exposed to all these like chemicals and dyes and sugar, we've got a nightmare on our hands. So it's triggered a lot of these neurological issues and those things too. So you can control that in your house. Just don't bring it into the household. And then you can make those requests at school as well, that you send snacks with your child and that you just watch for that. So if all of a sudden your child, comes home and they are wound up tighter than a drum, or they're acting out and they're hitting and they're aggressive, just, pay attention. What did they eat in the last 24 hours? That's out of the norm for them, because those dyes are really excitatory, especially the red dyes.
And, even teaching your child about, did you notice how you felt? I mean, let's think about what you ate. And so really giving them that control internally to know, I might not feel so great if I eat such and such, or if I, this isn't good for me. So it's really a teachable moment. We're going to come right back. We have some more things to talk about regarding sleep, and we have some questions from our viewers. We really need a 5-hour show for this, Dr. Dersken. So we'll be right back with more great information for you as parents and grandparents. Thank you.
Thanks, Kari.
And we're back with the segment of our show that wants to help you meet your parenting goals. We call it Your Parenting Destination. And I have some questions here, Dr. Dersken, but one of the questions that it's not something I wrote down, but that I was talking with somebody about, and you mentioned about sleep and the importance of creating some kind of a sleep sanctuary almost. Before we get to the actual questions that were sent in, could I ask you, to expand on that for us, please?
Absolutely. Our sleep environment is where our parasympathetics hit in, and that's where we really have our recovery. So there's a few things that any of us can do, whether it's for our child or ourselves. The bigger thing is, I would say, if you can turn off the circuit breaker to the room at night, just so we don't have that electrical introduction. And really a big thing is turning off the Wi-Fi to the house at night. A lot of these new devices, you actually can just flip off a switch, because you don't need the Wi-Fi going at night bombarding our brain. The other thing is, look at the bed. So preferably I have a bed with no metal in it, including in the mattress itself. So some of the newer mattresses don't have that in there. And then let's not run any cords under the bed, because it's turning the bed into a circuit. So if you need a clock in the room, do a battery operated clock. But some of the worst things we've seen have been some of these like Disney clocks and those things that plug in. Nothing against Disney, but they can send off a large signal. The other thing is, do you need cell phones near the bed? Including with our kids, we don't need them at night. And if you need something close to you at night, ideally it's in airplane mode, and it's all about the distance from your body. So if it's for you and you need it there, keep it at least like 4 feet away from your body, and don't have it plugging in right there at the bed. Keep it a distance from you. And then the other thing is, use 100% cotton sheets, because the polyester in the sheets, though it makes it nice and it won't, wrinkle, the polyester again is going to build up that static and is going to create more of a circuit.
Excellent. And I always encourage to add to that, and I know you believe this as well, get the electronics out of the bedroom as much as possible.
Right. As much as possible.
As much as possible. So creating a sleep sanctuary, as you said, your body repairs itself at night, and we want to give our bodies as much freedom to do that, if you will. And so our first question that was written in, Dr. Dersken, is from Danielle E. from Santa Fe. And Danielle writes, are there any tests that I may be able to do without a doctor that I can just send away for a kit and get the results back so I can have some information? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, good question, Danielle. So the other question I also get is, there's no way that I could do a blood test on my kiddo, right? There's no way we can do that. What else can we do? And one of my favorites is an organic acid test, which is a urine test you do off of first morning urine. I use a lab called Great Plains. I do find that to be the easiest, and you can order these things online. An organic acid test is going to give you all kinds of markers of mitochondrial function, which we haven't talked about at all. But mitochondria is what makes the ATP, which is the fuel to run the rest of the processes in the body. So if your child's really tired, maybe it's failure to thrive, they're not growing at the rates they want, or also like they've got an incredibly reactive following a viral illness. Or some of you may be dealing with long haulers. Mitochondrial suppression is a big piece there, and there'll be some markers there that will show up in the urine. It's also going to look at methylation markers. So much talk on methylation and this whole MTHFR thing, but this is going to look at all these B vitamin markers that impact inflammation in our cardiovascular system, that impact how we detox heavy metals, how we repair our brain. And we've really seen huge recovery with a lot of kids with, B12 shots and some of these high doses of B vitamins. And this is a simple urine test that can show if there's some flat out deficiencies.
So
it's also going to do, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, so it's the oat test. And if you would
The oat test, so the Great Plains organic acid test, or there are some other labs, but there's also markers on there for all of gut function. So there'll be a lot of markers for mold and yeast, and also for some of these Clostridia things and others that I looked at. So it'll give you an idea if something's really out of balance.
Excellent. Okay. And go on. You had another one that you were going to mention.
Yeah. And so the other one I would look at is a stool test. So no one likes to collect stool, but it's a lot easier sometimes than doing a blood draw. And so much of our health comes from our gut. So it's either called a CDSA, like a comprehensive digestive stool analysis. There are a variety of labs that do this, and a lot of these you can order on your own. I saw a company, and I haven't run it yet, but Thorne is offering one that's actually just a wipe, almost like a toilet paper wipe that dissolves, which could be an easier one than collecting the other, but it's going to give a lot of markers of what those good probiotics are looking like, if there's any bad guys thriving, if there's any yeast going on there, or if there's any maldigestion or some abnormalities in IgA and inflammatory markers. So very helpful tests.
And so if a person isn't familiar with how to read those tests, if they do them, my understanding from you is the lab will send back explanation. Maybe even you can call and say,
so this is the tough one. And this is actually something I'm working on with another physician. So we're trying to create a whole online parent group where we can, educate you on how to do that, because so many people don't have access. But a lot of these labs will come back with a basic report, and that you can start to understand that. It is good to team with a doctor who understands this more, who can guide you a bit as far as treatments. But you as a parent can go, oh gosh, my kid has a yeast issue here. Well, I can control sugar. I can control high yeast foods in the diet. And then maybe I seek out, a few herbs to help eradicate yeast.
Right. So it's at least a beginning point.
It's absolutely a great beginning point.
Excellent. Those are great resources. And we have one more question, Dr. Dersken, and it's from Caleb M. from Ferndale, Washington. And Caleb writes, I hear so much about the gut-brain connection. My 10-year-old daughter always complains of her stomach hurting. I took her to the pediatrician, and she said that all of the tests were fine. What are some things I can do to begin right away to help improve her gut?
Yeah, good question, Caleb. And this one comes up a lot. A lot of that basic testing that we get, and nothing against LabCorp or Quest, but is just looking for the things that would cause, acute diarrhea or very huge inflammatory problem. But it doesn't mean that things are in balance. And if your daughter's complaining of gut issues, there's gut issues. Mm-hmm. So I think binders are important. So something like charcoal or bentonite can be really helpful. Digestive enzymes are probably one of the first places I start, and looking for an enzyme product that has something called DPP4. That's going to really help you break down carbohydrates. And then a lot of those products also have lipase and protease and things in there to help break down fats and proteins. Why we want that is if it's reducing the particle size, it's going to reduce allergy responses. It's going to reduce those immune reactions, and it's not going to sit in there and ferment and allow all these other things to feed off of it.
Right.
And then also look at probiotics, right? So there's lots of great products, something like Culturelle you can get at most drugstores, really good for Clostridia, or something like Bifidus and those sorts of things. And then there's a product called Butyrate that's very soothing, really great for ammonia. So for kids with a lot of brain fog or focus issues that way, it's a stinky one. So better for the kids that can swallow pills, but those would be where I would start. And then the herbal treatments, there's
Absolutely.
lots of herbs you can do.
And it's not just that it will help what you just said. It won't just help the stomach ache. It will help the overall function of the body, of every system.
Absolutely.
Dr. Dersken, I am so sad, but we are just about out of time. I wish we could keep on going, but this has been really an eye-opener, I'm sure, for so many people. And I just want to reiterate something from the beginning, and that was that Since 2000, the year 2000, the rates in autism have dramatically increased to almost 250%. And Dr. Dirksen does not believe, nor do I believe, I've been doing this for a long time, that it's just a case of a better diagnosis. That might be responsible for some of it, but it's definitely not the bigger picture. Chronic illness in children has also been dramatically on the rise, 30 to 40% of an increase again since the year 2000. And so it's important as parents that we understand and we know at least a road to take, a path to at least begin to go down, instead of thinking there's nothing I can do. Dr. Dirksen, how can people find you? How can they find your website, your future book you're writing, the things that you're working on that maybe you can't offer to them to access today, but you can in the hopefully not too distant future?
Yeah. So, I mean, my mission has been, I started out as a child of a single mom, and there's no way we could have ever afforded medicine like this. And so, it's a luxury. It's not something that we can all do. And so I've been working very passionately with another doctor, Dr. Talia Hale, and we're developing an online training protocol, both for physicians so that more physicians know how to do this, but also to help educate parents in a reasonable way. And we'll be launching a book by the end of the year. I would encourage any of you to reach out to my website. So it's holistichealingarts.org. Get on our newsletter. We're starting to do Instagram posts, feeds. I'll do updates all the time of all kinds of tips and things that you can do. And you can also schedule a consult if you want. So even if you can't fly out to Washington to see someone like me, I can help you. We can order some tests. We can get started on kind of figuring out what might be going on and then help go from there. Or I'll do consultations all the time for someone just kind of figuring out how to navigate working with their own system. You can also look up the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, which is medmaps.org, to help find a doctor who's trained in your area in some of these treatments.
Such important resources for everyone. Thank you. And I am going to offer the screenshot, the graphic, if you will, of toxins, ways to reduce toxins in the home on my website at karikling.com. So if you would like to get a copy of that, just head on over. It'll be on the menu bar at the top. There's a page with all, this episode will be there. All of the episodes are there. And, my goal is, how do we look at some things that parents are facing and offer them strategies, content, and resources that the minute they're finished watching the show, they can put something into action. And Dr. Dirksen, I want to thank you so much for being here today and for your dedication to children, to families, to health, because you do it so well. And I'd like to end our show today with a quote from you. And you said, "No matter how sick children are or where they may fall on the autism spectrum, I believe that any person can greatly improve." Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.